Mr. Speaker, I know that members across the House share my concern about the situation in Afghanistan, the issues it raises for our own security, and the fears of many remaining in that country, especially women and children. The sacrifice in Afghanistan is seared into our national consciousness, with 150,000 people serving there from across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, including a number of members on all sides of the House whose voices will be particularly important today. And so it's absolutely right that we should come together for this debate. And, Mr. Speaker, yes, I will certainly give way to my right honourable friend.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. As someone who opposed this nation-building intervention, it now brings its responsibilities. In addition to getting our nationals out safely and in offering a generous welcome to the many refugees, will the Prime Minister assure me that all necessary resources are given to those Afghans and others who have helped the British Council in its work, including the promotion of women's rights, because many are in fear of their lives, of retribution from the Taliban? The Arab scheme is slow-moving at the moment. Will he commit the necessary resource? Because the window of opportunity is narrow and no one must be left behind.
Got the point. Can I just remind people, if you are going to intervene, you've got to be short. If you intervene more than twice, you'll understand why you've gone down the list, if there was one. Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I can assure him that I will, and as I will be saying in just a few moments, we will be supporting, doing everything we can to support those who have helped the UK mission in Afghanistan and investing everything that we can to support the wider area around Afghanistan and to do everything we can to avert a humanitarian crisis. Mr. Speaker, it's almost 20 years since the United States suffered the most catastrophic attack on its people since the Second World War, in which 67 British citizens also lost their lives at the hands of murderous terrorist groups incubated in Afghanistan. In response, NATO invoked Article 5 of its treaty for the first and only time in its history. And the United Kingdom, amongst others, joined America in going into Afghanistan on a mission to extirpate al-Qaeda in that country and to do whatever we could to stabilise Afghanistan in spite of all the difficulties and challenges we knew that we would face. And we succeeded in that core mission. And yes, I will give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, but would he agree that we are actually ceding back the country to the very insurgency that we went in to defeat in the first place? And the reputation of the West to support democracies across the world has suffered. There are so many lessons to be learned from what happened over the last 20 years. Will he now agree to an independent, formal inquiry into the conduct in Afghanistan?
Mr. Speaker, as I said in the House just a few weeks ago, there was an extensive defence review about the Afghan mission after the combat mission ended in 2014, and I believe that most of the key questions have already been extensively gone into. And it's important, Mr. Speaker, that we in this House should today be able to scrutinise events as they unfold. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, we succeeded in that core mission, and the training camps in the mountain ranges of Afghanistan were destroyed. Al-Qaeda plots against this country were foiled because our serving men and women were there. And no successful terrorist attacks against the West have been mounted from Afghan soil for 2 decades. Happily give way to my right honourable friend.
Prime Minister, can I just take him back to his remarks in the House of July the 8th when he referred to the assessment that he'd made? There's clearly been a catastrophic failure of our intelligence or our assessment of the intelligence because of the speed that this has caught us unawares. Can the Prime Minister set out for the House how we may assure ourselves that in future years we can make sure there are no future terrorist attacks put together in Afghanistan that take place here in the United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, I think it would be fair to say that the events in Afghanistan unfolded and the collapse has been faster than I think even the Taliban themselves predicted. What is not true is to say that the UK government was unprepared or did not foresee this, because it was certainly part of our planning, pitting the very difficult logistical operation for the withdrawal of UK nationals has been under preparation for many months, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell the House that the decision to commission the emergency handling centre at the airport, the commissioning of that centre, took place 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker. So, if I can just make a little bit more progress, Mr. Speaker. If I just a little bit, I will certainly give way in a moment. Alongside this core mission, we worked for a better future for the people of Afghanistan, and the heroism and tireless work of our armed forces contributed to national elections, as well as the promotion and protection of human rights and equalities in a way that many in Afghanistan had not previously known. Whereas 20 years ago almost no girls went to school and women were banned from positions of governance, now 3.6 million girls have been in school this year alone, and women hold over a quarter of the seats in the Afghan parliament. But Mr. Speaker, we must be honest and accept that huge difficulties were encountered at each turn, and some of this progress is fragile. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to our ambassador and the diplomatic team in Kabul and our armed forces on the ground who have been evacuating people in extraordinary circumstances. But one of the consequences of the rapidity of the collapse of Kabul is that many people have been left trapped, unable to access the airport, unable to evacuate, including many of those who should be coming to this country, who served us bravely in that country, and many women who are particularly at risk. Many of us across this House will have experienced chaos in the last 24, 48 hours in communicating information through to the ground to get some of those people out of the country. So can the Prime Minister give us some assurances about how we can get that information through so that we can get those brave people out of there, including many at risk of their lives right now in Kabul?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises exactly the right question. I spoke this morning to Ambassador Sara Britcliffe as well as to Brigadier Dan Blanchford, who's handling the evacuation. And it'd be fair to say the situation has stabilised since the weekend, but it remains precarious, and the UK officials on the ground are doing everything that they can to expedite the movement of people, those that need to come out, whether from the Arab scheme or the eligible persons, to get from Kabul to the airport. And at the moment, it would be fair to say that the Taliban are allowing that evacuation to go ahead. But the most important thing, Mr. Speaker, is that we get this done in as expeditious a fashion as we can, and that's what we are doing. And I may say that I'm grateful not just to the UK forces who are now out there helping to stabilise the airport, but also to the US forces as well. If I could just make some progress, Mr. Speaker. The combat phase of our mission ended in 2014, when we brought the vast majority of our troops home and handed over responsibility for security to the Afghans themselves, and we continued to support their efforts. Even at that stage, we should remember that conflict was continuous, and that in spite of the bravery and sacrifice of the Afghan army, and we should never forget that 69,000 of those Afghan army troops have given their lives in this conflict, significant parts of the country remain contested or under Taliban control. And so when, after 2 decades, the Americans prepared to take their long-predicted and well-trailed step of a final extraction of their forces, we looked at many options, Mr. Speaker, including the potential for staying longer ourselves, finding new partners, or even increasing our presence. And I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. Will you share with the House what assessment UK intelligence services made of the relative fighting capacity currently of the Afghan army and the Taliban? And will he tell us what representations the UK government made to our US allies with regard to their timetable for withdrawal from Afghanistan?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I think that when he asks for a commentary on the respective military potential power of the Taliban and the Afghan forces, it's pretty clear from what has happened that the collapse of the Afghan forces has been much faster than expected. And as for our NATO allies and allies around the world, when it came for us to look at the options that this country might have in view of the American decision to withdraw, Mr. Speaker, we came up against this hard reality that since 2009, America has deployed 98% of all weapons released from NATO aircraft in Afghanistan, and at the peak of the operation, when there were 132,000 troops on the ground, 90,000 of them, Mr. Speaker, were American. The West could not continue this US-led mission, a mission conceived and executed in support and defence of America, without American logistics, without US air power, and without American might. And I do not believe... I give way with pleasure.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. I note the point that he's making about the importance of American support for our efforts in Afghanistan and those of our allies. But will he please set out when he first spoke personally to Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary-General of NATO, to discuss with him the possibility of putting together an alliance of other forces in order to replace the American support in Afghanistan?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I spoke to Secretary-General Stoltenberg the other day about NATO's continuing role in Afghanistan. But I really think that it is an illusion to believe that there is appetite amongst any of our partners for a continued military presence or for a military solution imposed by NATO in Afghanistan, Mr. Speaker. That idea ended with the combat mission in 2014, and I do not believe that today, I do not believe that deploying tens of thousands of British troops to fight the Taliban is an option that, no matter how sincerely people may advocate it, and I appreciate their sincerity, but I do not believe that that is an option that would commend itself either to the British people or, Mr. Speaker, to this House. Mr. Speaker, we must deal with the position as it now is, accepting what we have achieved and what we have not achieved. And I will give way to the right honourable lady.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. He seemed to be making an argument earlier that he had anticipated something similar to what went on by having the rapid response force ready and waiting. Why then was he and the Foreign Secretary both on their holidays when this catastrophe happened?
Mr. Speaker, the government has been working round the clock to deal with the unfolding situation, and we must deal with the world as it is, accepting what we have achieved and what we have not achieved. And the UK will work with our international partners on a shared plan to support the people of Afghanistan and to contribute to regional stability. There will be 5 parts, Mr. Speaker, to this approach. First, our immediate focus, in just a minute, our immediate focus must be on helping those to whom we have direct obligations by evacuating UK nationals together with those Afghans who have assisted our efforts over the past 20 years. And I know the whole House will join me in paying tribute to the bravery and commitment of our Ambassador, Sir Bristol. I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for giving way on that particular point. He will be aware that there are 228 missionaries in Afghanistan currently under sentence of death. Those missionaries need to be taken out of Afghanistan. Of course, there are tens of thousands of others who are under sentence of death and fear for their life. Will the Prime Minister assure the House that every effort will be made to bring back to safe haven people whose lives are under threat as a result of the catastrophe and foreign policy episode that has gone on in that country.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for raising the very needy case that he does, and I'm sure that colleagues across the House, literally every member, would I imagine, has received messages from people who know someone who needs to get out of Afghanistan. And I can tell the right honourable gentleman that we are doing everything we can to help out of that country those people to whom we owe, Mr. Speaker, a debt of obligation. And on that point, I want to repeat my thanks not just to Laurie Bristow, but also to the Commander on the ground, Brigadier Dan Blanchford, and the entire British team in Kabul. I can tell the House that we have so far, I'm going to make some progress, Mr. Speaker, we have so far secured the safe return of 306 UK nationals and 2,052 Afghan nationals as part of our resettlement programme, with a further 2,000 Afghan applications completed and many more being processed. UK officials are working round the clock to keep the exit door open in the most difficult circumstances and actively seeking those we believe are eligible but as yet unregistered. And I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank him for giving way. Can you explain then how many people think are still eligible for relocation and have still to sign up? And he says they're doing everything they can to get these people out. So what does everything they can mean? How are they identifying these people, where they are, especially if they're already in hiding in fear of their lives?
That's why, Mr. Speaker, it's been so important that we maintain a presence at Kabul airport, and that's why we've been getting the message out that we want people to come through. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, earlier on, it is important for everybody to understand that at the moment, in the days that we have ahead of us, which may be short, but at the moment this is an environment in which the Taliban are permitting this evacuation to take place. Mr. Speaker, these are interpreters, they are locally engaged staff and others who have risked their lives supporting our military efforts and seeking to secure new freedoms for their country. We are proud to bring these brave Afghans to our shores, and we continue to appeal for more to come forward. And I give way with pleasure.
I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister. The Home Secretary announced this morning that the UK will be taking 20,000 refugees from Afghanistan, but that only 5,000 will be able to come this year. What are the 15,000 meant to do? Hang around and wait until they've been executed?
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Speaker, that's the 5,000 on whom we're spending 200 million to bring a further 5,000 on top of the, I think it will be 10,000 altogether that we bring in under the ARAP and other programmes. We will be increasing that number over the coming years to, as I said, to 20,000. But the bulk of the effort of this country will be directed and should be directed, Mr. Speaker, to supporting people in Afghanistan and in the region, Mr. Speaker, in order to prevent a worse humanitarian crisis. And I believe, and may I tell the House that in that conviction, I am supported very strongly both by President Macron of France and by Chancellor Merkel of Germany. We are also, Mr. Speaker, doing everything possible to accelerate the visas for the 30...
The member for Hyndburn can't be like a drone in the chamber, completely above everybody all the way through. Stand up and down, please, not just hover. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I was telling the House that we are making sure that we bring back the 35 brilliant evening scholars so that they can come and study in our great universities. We're deploying an additional 800 British troops to support this evacuation operation, and I can assure the House that we will continue this operation for as long as conditions at the airport allow, and I would give way to the honourable lady.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as of last week, it was still Home Office policy that we would send people back to Kabul because we thought Kabul was safe. Can the Prime Minister now also confirm It's not just about people coming out of Afghanistan, it's about keeping people safe here, and we will not send people back to this nightmare.
She's entirely right. We will not be sending people back to Afghanistan, and nor, by the way, Mr. Speaker, will be allowing people to come from Afghanistan to this country in an indiscriminate way. We want to be generous, but we must make sure that we look after our own security. And over the coming weeks, we will redouble our efforts, working with others to protect the UK homeland and all our citizens and interests from any threat that may emanate from a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, from terrorism to the narcotics trade. And I give way to my honourable friend,
Mr. Forgiving-Way, does he agree with me that we have to do everything we can to support those who have supported us, like the Royal Marine Pen Farthing and his NALZ charity of veterinary staff and their immediate family who now need safe passage back to the UK?
Mr. Speaker, I think, like many of us, I have been extensively lobbied on behalf of the excellent work done by Mr. Pen Farthing. I'm well aware of his cause, all the wonderful things that he has done. And for animals in Afghanistan, I can tell my honourable friend that we will do everything we can to help Mr. Pen Farthing and others who face particular difficulty like himself. And, but as I say, without in any way jeopardising our own national security. These are concerns shared across the international community, from the region itself to all the NATO alliance and indeed all 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. And I will chair a virtual meeting of the G7 in the coming days. Third, Mr. Speaker, we also have, in a minute, we also have an enduring commitment to all the Afghan people, and now, more than ever, we must reaffirm that commitment. Our efforts must be focused on supporting the Afghan people in the region itself, particularly those fleeing conflict or the threat of violence. We therefore call on the United Nations to lead a new humanitarian effort in this region, and I give way to the Right Honourable Lady Opposite.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way, and I welcome his commitment to support in the region and also the Government's commitment to a resettlement programme. But could he confirm the Home Secretary announced in 2019 that the UK would continue a resettlement scheme of 5,000 refugees a year after the Syrian scheme closed? Could he confirm that the announcement today of an Afghan resettlement scheme is in addition to that existing 5,000 resettlement commitment, as opposed to simply being a refocusing or a displacement of that existing 5,000 a year resettlement programme?
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady Opposite, because I think she's asked a question that formed itself in many people's minds about the 5,000s, and yes, indeed, the 5,000 that extra in the resettlement scheme are additional to those already announced. And we will support those people in coming to this country. We will also support the wider international community in delivering on humanitarian projects in the region by doubling, Mr. Speaker, the amount of humanitarian and development assistance that we had previously committed to Afghanistan this year, with new funding, wait for it, Mr. Speaker, taking this up to £286 million with immediate effect. And we call on others, £286 million with immediate effect, and we call on others to work together on a shared humanitarian effort, focusing on helping the most vulnerable in what will be formidably difficult circumstances. And I give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister, and he's being very generous with his time. Over the past 20 years, there have been some 50 NATO and partner nations that have been involved in Afghanistan. I welcome the measures that have been proposed by the UK and other countries such as the US, Canada, France, Germany and so on. However, there are many countries still who have been involved in Afghanistan in recent years who have still yet to come to the plate and to recognise their responsibility in helping these people at this desperate time. Would the Prime Minister inform the House what is being done
to encourage these other countries to take up their responsibility and help these people in Afghanistan.
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point, Mr. Speaker, and that's why the UK has chaired the Security Council of the UN and asked to put a motion together with our French friends to get the world to focus on the humanitarian needs of Afghanistan. And we'll be doing the same thing in NATO, in the G7 and the other bodies in which we have a leadership role. And we want all these countries to step up, as he rightly says, Mr. Speaker, and focus on the most vulnerable in what will be formidably difficult circumstances. Fourth, Mr. Speaker, I've given away, I think you'll agree, quite a lot already this morning, and I know that thanks to the generosity of yourself, Mr. Speaker, and the House, there is now ample time for debate until later on this afternoon, where I think many members will be able to get their points across. I therefore intend, Mr. Speaker, by your leave, to make some progress. Fourth, while we must focus on the region itself, we will also create safe and legal routes for those Afghans most in need to come and settle here in the UK. So in addition to those Afghans with whom we've worked directly, I can announce today that we're committing to relocating another 5,000 Afghans this year with a new and bespoke resettlement scheme focusing on the most vulnerable, particularly women and children. And we will keep this under review for future years with the potential of accommodating up to 20,000 over the long term. And so taken together, Mr. Speaker, I've been very generous with my interventions. I think you will agree already, and I've made my position clear. Taken together, Mr. Speaker, we are committing almost £500 million of humanitarian funding to support the Afghan people. Fifth, Mr. Speaker, we must also face the reality of a change of regime in Afghanistan. And as President of the G7, the UK will work to unite the international community behind a clear plan for dealing with this regime in a unified and concerted way. Over the last 3 days, I've spoken with the NATO and UN Secretaries General, with President Biden, with Chancellor Merkel, with President Macron and Prime Minister Khan. We are clear and we have agreed that it would be a mistake for any country to recognise any new regime in Kabul prematurely or bilaterally. Instead, those countries that care about Afghanistan's future should work towards common conditions about the conduct of the new regime before deciding, together, whether to recognise it and on what terms. We will judge this regime based on the choices it makes and by its actions rather than by its words. On its attitude to terrorism, to crime and narcotics, as well as humanitarian access and the rights of girls to receive an education. Defending human rights will remain of the highest priority, and we will use every available political and diplomatic means to ensure that those human rights remain at the top of the international agenda. Mr. Speaker, our United Kingdom has a roll call of honour that bears the names of 457 servicemen and women who gave their lives in some of the world's harshest terrain, and many others who bear injuries to this day, fighting in what had become the epicentre of global terrorism. And even amid the heart-wrenching scenes we see today, I believe they should be proud of their achievements. And we should be deeply proud of them, because they conferred benefits that are lasting and ineradicable on millions of people in one of the poorest countries on earth. And they provided vital protection for 2 decades to this country and the rest of the world. They gave their all for our safety, and we owe it to them to give our all to prevent Afghanistan from once again becoming a breeding ground for terrorism. Because no matter how grim the lessons of the past, the future is not yet written. And at this bleak turning point, we must help the people of Afghanistan to choose the best of all their possible futures. and in the UN, the G7, in NATO, with friends and partners around the world. That is the critical task on which this government is now urgently engaged and will be engaged in the days to come. Yeah.